In this video, we're going to talk about a monopoly and what that actually means in business. So hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you stay educated on how your money works. A monopoly is an enterprise that is the only seller of a good or service. In the absence of government intervention, a monopoly is free to set any price it chooses and will usually set the price that yields the largest possible profit. Just being a monopoly need not make an enterprise more profitable than any other enterprises that face competition. The market may be so small that it barely supports one enterprise. But if the monopoly is in fact more profitable than competitive enterprises, economists expect the other entrepreneurs will enter the business to capture some of the higher returns. If enough rivals enter, their competition will drive prices down and eliminate monopoly power. Before and during the period of the classical economics, that's roughly between 1776 and 1850, most people believed that this process of monopolies being eroded by new competitors was pervasive. The only monopolies that could persist, they thought, were those that got the government to exclude rivals. Even today, most important enduring monopolies or near monopolies in the US rest on government policies. The government's support is responsible for fixing agricultural prices above competitive levels, for the exclusive ownership of cable television operating systems in most markets, for the exclusive franchise of public utilities and radio and TV channels, for the single post service, the list goes on and on. Monopolies that exist independent of government support are likely to be due to smallness of markets, such as the only pharmacy in town, or to rest on temporary leadership in innovation, such as the aluminum company during World War II. So why do economists object to monopoly? The purely economic argument against monopoly is very different from that non-economists might expect. Successful monopolists charge prices above what they would be with competition so that customers pay more and the monopolists and perhaps their employees gain. It may seem strange, but economists see no reason to criticize monopolies simply because they transfer wealth from customers to monopoly producers. That is because economists have no way of knowing who is the more worthy of the two parties, the producer or the customer. Of course, people may object to the wealth transfer on other grounds, including moral ones, but the transfer itself does not present an economic problem. Rather, the purely economic case against monopoly is that it reduces aggregate economic welfare, as opposed to simply making some people worse off and others better off by an equal amount. When the monopolist raises prices above the competitive level in order to reap his monopoly profits, customers buy less of the product, less is produced, and society as a whole is worse off. In short, monopoly reduces society's income. So then let's look at a simple example. Consider the case of a monopolist who produces his product at a fixed cost of, let's say, $5 per unit, where the cost includes a competitive rate of return on his investment. The cost is $5 no matter how many units the monopolist makes. The number of units he sells, however, depends on the price he charges. The monopolist is best off when he limits production to 200 units, which he sells for $7 each. He then earns monopoly profits, which economists call economic rent, of $2 per unit, $7 minus his $5 cost, which again includes a competitive rate of return on his investment, times 200 or $400 a year. If he makes and sells 300 units at $6 each, he earns a monopoly profit of only $300, $1 per unit times 300 units. If he makes and sells 420 units at $5 each, he earns no monopoly profit, just a fair return on the capital invested in the business. Thus, the monopolist is $400 richer because of his monopoly position at the $7 price. However, society is worse off. Customers would be delighted to buy 220 more units if the price were $5. The demand tells us they value the extra 220 units at prices that do not fall to $5 until they have 420 units. Let us assume that these additional 220 units have an average value of $6 for consumers. These additional 220 units would only cost $5 each, so the consumer would gain 220 times $1 of satisfaction, if the competitive price of $5 were set. Because the monopolist would cover his cost of producing the extra 220 units, he would lose nothing. Producing the extra 220 units therefore would benefit society to the tune of $220. But the monopolist chooses not to produce the extra 220 units because to sell them at $5 a piece, he would have to cut the price on the other 200 units from $7 to $5. The monopolist would lose $400, 200 units times $2 per unit reduction in price, but consumers would gain the same $400. In other words, selling at a competitive price would transfer $400 from the monopolist to consumers and create an added $220 of value for society. The desire of economists to have the state combat or control monopolies has undergone a long cycle. As late as 1890, when the Sherman antitrust law was passed, most economists believe that the only anti-monopoly policy needed was to restrain government's impulse to grant exclusive privileges, such as that is given to the British East India Company to trade with India. They thought that the other sources of market dominance, such as superior efficiency, should be allowed to operate freely, to the benefit of consumers, since consumers would ultimately be protected from excessive prices by potential or actual rivals. Traditionally, monopoly was identified with a single seller and competition with the existence of even a few rivals, but economists became more and more favorable towards antitrust policies as their view of monopoly and competition changed. With the development of the concept of perfect competition, which required a vast number of rivals making the identical commodity, many industries became classified as oligopolies, one with just a few sellers. And oligopolies, economists believe, surely often had market power, the power to control prices alone or in collusion. Most recently, many economists have lost both their enthusiasm for antitrust policy and much of their fear of oligopolies. The declining support for antitrust policies has been due to the often objectionable use to which their policy has been put. The Robinson-Patman Act, designed to prevent price discrimination, has often been used to limit rivalry instead of increase it. Antitrust laws have prevented many useful mergers, especially vertical ones. A vertical merger is one in which company A buys another company that supplies company A's input or sells A's output. If a society wishes to control monopoly, at least those monopolies that were not created by its own government, it has three broad options. The first is an antitrust policy of the American variety, the second is public regulation, and the third is public ownership and operation. Like monopoly, none of these is ideal. Antitrust policy is expensive to enforce. The Antitrust Division of the Department of Justice had a budget of $133 million, and the Federal Trade Commission's budget was only $183 million. The defendants probably spend 10 or 20 times as much. Moreover, antitrust is slow moving. It takes years before a monopoly practice is identified and more years to reach a decision. The antitrust case that led to the breakup of the American Telephone and Telegraph Company, AT&T, began in 1974 and was under judicial administration until 1996. Public regulation has been the preferred choice in America, beginning with the creation of the Interstate Commerce Commission in 1887 and extending down to municipal regulation of taxicabs and ice companies. Yet most public regulation has been the effort of reducing or eliminating competition rather than eliminating a monopoly. The limited competition and resulting higher profit of owners for taxis is the reason why New York City cab medallions sold for more than $150,000. Moreover, regulation of natural monopolies has mitigated some monopoly power but usually introduces serious inefficiencies in the design and operation of such utilities. A famous theorem in economics states that a competitive enterprise economy will produce the largest possible income from a given stock of resources. No real economy meets the exact conditions of the theorem, and all real economies will fall short of the ideal economy, a difference called market failure. However, the degree of market failure for the US economy is much smaller than the political failure arising from the imperfections of economic policies found in real political systems. The merits of laissez-faire rest less on its famous theoretical foundations than on its advantages over the actual performance of rival forms of economic organizations. So then let's talk about natural monopolies. The main kind of monopoly that is both persistent and not caused by the government is what economists call a natural monopoly. A natural monopoly comes about due to economies of scale, that is, due to unit costs that fall as a firm's production increases. One firm can produce the industry's whole output at a lower cost than 2 or 3 firms could. The reason is that multiple firms cannot fully exploit these economies of scale. Many economists believe that the distribution of electric power, but not the production of it, is an example of a natural monopoly. The economies of scale exist because another firm that would enter would need to duplicate existing power lines, whereas if only one firm existed, this duplication would not be necessary, and one firm that serves everyone would have a lower cost per customer than 2 or 3 firms. Whether and how government should regulate monopoly is controversial among economists. Most favor regulation to prevent the natural monopoly from charging a monopoly price. Other economists want no regulation because they believe that even natural monopolies must face some competition, and they want the natural monopoly to have a strong incentive to cut costs. Besides regulating price, governments usually prevent competing firms from entering an industry that is thought to be a natural monopoly. A firm that wants to compete with a local utility, for example, cannot legally do so. Economists tend to oppose regulating entry. Here's the reason for that. If the industry really is a natural monopoly, then preventing new competitors from entering is unnecessary because no competitor would want to enter it anyway. If, on the other hand, the industry is not a natural monopoly, then preventing competition is undesirable. Either way, preventing entry does not make sense. So what are your thoughts about monopoly? Should it exist? Should they be regulated? Should they not exist? Leave a comment down below and let's get a discussion started. And as always, take care of your money. Today's book of the day is The Color of Money by Mehrsa Baradaran. I'll leave a link to the book down below, and if you prefer listening to it on an audiobook for free, I'll also leave a link to a 30-day free trial to Audible. You can choose this book or any book to listen to, and even if you cancel before your free trial is over, you can still keep the book and listen to it whenever you want. Last thing before you go, a financial education is the most important kind of education you can give your kids. That's why I created Smart Money Parenting as a way to prepare you and your kids about the highs and lows of managing your own money. I'll leave a link to the course down below so you can check it out.